Morning, everyone. Welcome to the concurrent session D1 to BLE or not to BLE. We're going to have three great presentations today. And first, right off the bat, is our base level engineering to detailed studies. We have three presenters who will be presenting. This presentation is the Texas Water Development Board and FEMA Region 6 has been partnering to perform base level engineering throughout the state of Texas. A recently completed detailed study aligned well with a previously completed BLE study of the same watershed. The similar floodplain results validated the use of gauge-adjusted BLE for the development of the flood risk products and as a building block for future detailed studies in the area which have outdated or incomplete flood risk information. Our three presenters, our first presenter is Mr. Jack Young. He is from Halff Associates. Mr. Young has been with Halff since June 2008 and currently serves as a project manager. He is Halff's primary liaison to Compass PTS and FEMA Region 6. Mr. Young has considerable experience and knowledge of FEMA's programs and regulations, including the CRS program. The second presenter is Ms. Erica Nordstrom. She is also a PE from the Halff Associates. Erica Nordstrom is a civil engineer with extensive experience and passion for water resources engineering. She has been involved in numerous flood planning and design projects throughout the state. And through these projects, he has formed a trusted working relationship with local, state, and federal agencies. And our third presenter, Mr. Manuel Razo from the Texas Water Development Board. He is a manager of the Flood Mapping Group and a cooperating technical partners program coordinator at the Texas Water Development Board. Mr. Razo has worked in the floodplain and stormwater division management for 14 years in the public and private sector. Mr. Razo is a GIS professional and a certified floodplain manager. He is a true historian, knows a lot of information, especially about the Alamo. So if you ever see him around, ask him some questions. He will definitely have that information. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over for our first presentation. Mr. Manuel Razo will go ahead and kick us off.
Young and Erica Nordstrom from Halff Associates. They're one of the consultants that we use at the Water Development Board to help us with our projects for the Cooperating Technical Partners Program. This morning, we're going to talk to you guys about base level engineering and how we get that to these detailed studies. So the Water Development Board, we've been a CTP with FEMA since 2000. We're also the state coordinator for the National Flood Insurance Program. We administer several federal and state grant programs along with some loan programs. One of the state grants that we'll be emphasizing today is the Flood Protection Planning Grant. We also have the Texas Natural Resources Information System, and that's basically the clearinghouse of GIS data statewide. We disseminate that data to the public and to other agencies, whether they be federal or state. So any GIS data that's out there, we have it there at TNRIS. And then we're also in the process of implementing the first statewide flood plan for Texas. It was a directive that we received from this last legislative session. So we implemented a few new programs here at the Water Development Board to get this flood planning process going. And this was a result of quite a bit of floods that we had since 2015 that were very devastating statewide. And the legislature really noticed that we needed to do better. And so they directed us to do these additional tasks. So I mentioned the Flood Protection Planning Grant earlier. This grant is one that we've had for over 30 years. It can fund flood early warning systems, flood response plans, and flood protection planning studies. The key here are these flood protection planning studies. We partner up with the communities, and it's a 50-50 grant typically. And these communities will come to us and say, hey, look, we have these areas where we have a lot of flooding. We don't really understand what's causing it. So they come to us to get the money to do these studies, and it identifies what the flooding is and ways to mitigate the flooding. And so these are just a few of the watersheds where we've had some of these flood protection planning studies conducted here at the state. And we've taken these and used them as leverage for CTP projects. One way that we identify what watersheds we need to do projects are is through the prioritization tool that we had developed a few years ago. Basically, it looks at all the HUCs in the state. We have about 208 HUC-8s statewide, and we look at LiDAR availability, the status of the floodplain maps, the current population, projected population, repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss data, NFIP claims data. Recently, the hydrology for the state was updated, so we incorporate these changes of Atlas 14. We look to see if there's a champion, and by that, we mean any other CTPs. There's 11 CTPs statewide, so we look and see, hey, is there a CTP in this watershed that's already doing work? So we take that into consideration. And then, of course, the leverage. We look to see if there's any leverage within the watershed. We take all these numbers, we assign them weights, we crunch them, and it prioritizes the watersheds for us. Back in FY17, when we kicked off the Lower Colorado Come and Study, that watershed was in the top 10 watersheds in the state. And so that's how we initiated the project there. And so here, this is where you see, the typical FEMA process of updating the flood insurance rate maps. For us, it's a little bit different because if you look under phase 1, the TCRFC map needs, that's the Texas Colorado River Floodplain Coalition. They went ahead and did a map needs assessment, and they looked at all the communities along the Colorado River here in the state of Texas, identified what their needs were, what their problems were, and that's how we came up with this map needs assessment, which was very similar to Discovery. Then we took this flood protection planning study, and we went back to FEMA and said, hey, look, we have this map needs assessment, we have this flood protection study, we want to do a phase 2 study, but we don't have BLE yet. So the region went ahead and kicked off that BLE process for us. And so by the time we had the funding available to us that October for the CTP project of the phase 2 study, the BLE was already done, and we were able to kick that project off right away. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to C.Eng to talk about the BLE process.
Thanks, Manny. Yeah, I'm going to highlight kind of what BLE is and then talk specifics about this watershed. So what is BLE? BLE is an automated riverine hydrologic and hydraulic modeling approach, which is validated by engineers and intended to develop a baseline understanding of flood risk to communities. It's typically performed at a HUC-8 level, and the results are Zone A equivalent data, which FEMA Region 6 uses to support the assessment and maintenance of the National Flood Hazard Inventory. So why is there an investment in base level engineering? Well, so each mile stream shown on the flood insurance rate map is required by Congress to be reviewed and validated by FEMA every 5 years. The flood hazard information is reviewed to determine if the as-built environment or expected watershed runoff have changed since the previous study was performed. A large portion of the National Flood Hazard Inventory of stream miles is currently unknown or unverified. So with population estimates expected to double in some areas of the country, FEMA was faced with the need to make investment with data that can help communities experience growth now. With that in mind, base level engineering production is intended to focus on 3 types of miles: unknown, unverified miles, unmodernized communities and counties, and unmapped miles. This graphic is courtesy of FEMA Region 6 and really shows those 3 focus areas, which is really the original intent behind base level engineering in FEMA Region 6. So as I mentioned, there are various levels, various uses of the base level engineering, but specifically for the Water Development Board's use and the community's use. Really the key is to identify flood risk in those areas with no maps or limited information or outdated information, really supporting the assessment of those current maps and providing updated risk data to those underserved communities or more rural areas. Just BLE but does not replace existing limited or detailed studies. It didn't include creek crossings and includes limited dam and levee information. It's really being used at that watershed-wide, that 1,000 miles at a time level, and it's really valuable for those more rural communities. So base level engineering is made up of 4 key components of the study, technical components. It's very similar to detailed studies, but done at a much larger scale and in much shorter amounts of time. So it really starts with that terrain. So description of the ground surface, really using to define flow direction and define drainage channel. For a base level engineering study in Region 6, it has to be based 90% on LiDAR. So it really gets beyond the traditional USGS 10-foot contours. That hydrology, how much water is expected to flow, hydraulics, how is that water conveyed through drainage channels and through the community, and finally that floodplain mapping. Where will floodwaters expand to? What is the limit of risk as defined by the previous 3 steps? So specifically to the Lower Colorado Commons, FEMA initiated a BLE study in the Lower Colorado Commons watershed in 2018. The study was performed by the Compass PTS team, which is a FEMA Region 6 partner, and has been working with FEMA Region 6 the last 5 years to really enhance and define what BLE is, both on the 1D and 2D side within the region. So here's a snapshot of the watershed. It spans 7 counties and 27 communities. If you look at the upper left-hand corner of this exhibit, you see Travis County, where the city of Austin is. So this is a very rapidly expanding area, a lot of population growth in Central Texas, and really, as Mandy mentioned, really a need to be restudied to get ahead of that growth and the development. So the terrain, as I mentioned, was based on 2017 LiDAR. The hydrology, again, that large-scale engineering analysis. So this is based on 6,500 square miles drainage area. And as part of the 1D BLE process, regional regression is applied, and really the basis for the flows and discharges through the watershed. But we enhance it to calibrate it to gauge data. So specifically this watershed, there are multiple gauges along the Colorado River that were used to validate and adjust those regional regression flows to get more accurate data. And then hydraulics, we generated HEC-RAS model for every stream studied, as shown in this exhibit, which was only over 2,000 miles of stream. So each one has a hydraulic model with cross sections and can be used individually by those communities. So this exhibit shows the comparison between our BLE and the effective data. So that black line, that's the effective 100-year Zone A floodplain through some of the more rural parts of this watershed. The basis for that data a lot of times was based in the 70s and 80s, as I mentioned, based on the USGS 10-foot contours and redelineated part of map mod. But the BLE really shows what the limits of the floodplain are, and based off of that LiDAR data set. And you can see it's much more accurate, much more well-defined through the main channel here. In addition to just a better definition of flood risk, you can see we expand beyond the limits of the effective study. We go to the 1 square mile in the rural areas and half a square mile in urban areas is the limit of study. So we provide data sets that are useful to communities outside of the effective floodplain. So these can be used by community officials and floodplain administrators to really define risk outside of that effective limit and help both on the emergency management side and the development side to really promote responsible development. So as part of the BLE studies, we develop the results and then deliver them to FEMA Region 6 for review and validation, at which point they get transferred to the USGS. And in partnership with FEMA Region 6 and the USGS, they created this great estimated base flood elevation viewer. And the intent of this viewer was to be able to ingest these large data sets and send them to be able to be downloaded automatically by communities, by developers, and really try to navigate that complex data requirement and request system. So you can actually go into this viewer, click and download individual models, mapping, and all shape files that kind of go there, as well as depth grids and elevation grids. So really can get to that floodplain measure quickly. And so this just shows kind of the current watersheds that are available. But the partnerships with entities like the Water Development Board, they're rapidly expanding the availability of this data, and they have multiple studies that are in place. So this is being updated monthly as those data sets become available, with the intent as having regional coverage ultimately. Now I'm going to turn it over to Erica to really to highlight that phase 2 data development work they did.
Thanks, Jack. As Manny had mentioned earlier, we had a number of flood protection planning studies that we leveraged as part of the Lower Colorado Cummins Phase 2 detailed study. We took those studies and we amended them and updated them for the current 2017 LiDAR and also based upon current aerial photos. We updated the rainfall data for Atlas 14 precipitation depth. And as a result of that study, we produced FEMA compliant data and mapping products that can now be moved eventually into phase 3, products that'll update the firms. And we also produce non-regulatory products that are used to assist the floodplain managers in these communities to be able to do outreach with their citizens within their cities and within the county itself. The Lower Colorado Cummins Phase 2 project consisted of 172 stream miles. Of that 172 stream miles, we had 6 miles that was a brand new study. That's the Cedar Creek Connectivity Reach that connects from the confluence of Cedar Creek and Walnut Creek and continues down to the confluence with the Colorado River. This additional study area included additional survey that was incorporated into those models as well. So as you can see in this comparison of our detailed study floodplain for the 100-year back to the BLE floodplains, which are shown by those black lines, we had very similar floodplain results. You do see some differences along the main stem of Cedar Creek. However, in the rural communities, we saw that the BLE validated our phase 2 detailed study floodplains quite well. Looking at an area that has a little more development, this is along Piney Creek. It runs along the north side of the city of Bastrop. In this area, we do see some differences between the BLE floodplains and our phase 2 floodplains. Our phase 2 floodplains are slightly wider in several areas. This is largely due to just the development and the constrictions for our road crossings that are included in our phase 2 detailed studies, which are not included in the BLE models. However, you can still see generally the shape of those floodplains are still very similar. So something that was really unique about the Lower Colorado Cummins project in general is it was the first direct comparison of a phase 2 detailed study back to that base level engineering. Because we were able to really validate the results between those two studies, that allowed us to have additional buy-in from our communities and our counties to show them the real benefit of base level engineering for those rural areas that may have outdated mapping or don't have current floodplain mapping products available. That base level engineering data is a building block for future flood protection planning studies and can be transitioned into these detailed studies well. As Jack had mentioned, the BLE regression flows were calibrated to gauge data. That calibration of those flows allowed us to have a really reasonable flow comparison back to what we got in our phase 2 detailed studies using Atlas 14 precipitation depths. We also utilized the BLE model to supplement our hydrologic routing. So we had areas within our study area where we didn't have local hydraulic models that were being developed as part of the phase 2 detailed study. So we use those BLE models in that area to provide us better routing results. So in general, the BLE alignment as compared to detailed studies is very good in our rural areas. Those are going to be the areas that don't have a lot of constrictions. They don't have a lot of road crossings. So because of that, it's a very beneficial product where you have limited development currently. In those areas where you have more developed urbanized areas, you may see that those differ, just like I showed you on that Piney Creek exhibit, where they may not align perfectly, but yet they still show a very similar shape to those floodplains. Now, Manny's going to talk to you about our phase 2 outreach.
So from the beginning, our approach was that we wanted to be as open and transparent with the communities as possible. Like I mentioned earlier, this whole project began with that MAB needs assessment by the Texas Colorado River Floodplain Coalition and the flood protection planning grant that Bastrop County initiated with us. So, we just wanted to have the communities on board. We sent out the 30-day notice just like the guidance requires. But beyond that, we went and had a kickoff meeting with the communities. We talked about the base level engineering, what it looked like, and explained, what it was and how they could use it. And then we also discussed the detailed studies, what was coming, what the process was going to be, our methods, and just, giving the communities a heads up, and just in an effort to try to be as transparent as possible. Once the project and the detailed analysis was done, we went and had a flood risk review meeting, and we just had the project overview, just giving them a head, this is what we did. We had some web maps created so they could easily compare, similar to the changes since last firm. We took some work maps out there for them to mark up. That way, if they had any questions, they could mark it up. We could go back, look at the analysis that was done, and answer any questions that they had about those areas of concern for them. And it was just a follow-up that was easily done with the communities. So the key thing here was this partnership and coordination. We always want to be as transparent as possible with what we're doing, but work with the locals, but also work with the region. And I think this gave us the opportunity to continue to do that. We've had really good success through this process. We had another project that was done down in the San Bernard watershed where we didn't have any appeals and protests. And we hopefully, this Lower Colorado Commons project will have the same results. So hopefully just, the constant communication and transparency of what we're doing will allow for that to continue. So this is just an idea of what is going on with the regulatory product update. Here you can see what we have effective for Bastrop County, but then we're also going to be taking those 172 miles to do a physical map revision for some select streams within Bastrop County, the city of Bastrop, and the city of Smithville. And then, this continued partnership is what we're looking forward to doing, not just with the region, but with the community statewide. We've got this plan to develop base level engineering statewide and advance some of that to phase 2 studies. Hopefully, we're also looking at how we can enhance the base level engineering to meet our flood planning process that the state has implemented. The base level engineering is a great kind of base to develop data, and we just want to enhance it so that we can potentially increase what we're doing on the planning side. And then we're going to continue to do some phase 2 studies. The Plum Creek one, we've already got base level engineering data there, and we're just going to advance now and do some detailed studies. The other thing too is we've got about half the state has DFIRM and the other half has either paper maps or no maps. And so what we're wanting to do is take that base level engineering data and see if we can update or produce
will you
maps
tell
for
us
some of these
how much
communities
time
that
we
are
have left for
unmapped. We have a
questions?
lot of them that are still in the emergency phase of the program, and we want to get them into the regular phase. And where appropriate, I think the base level engineering data can help us get some of these communities with flood insurance rate maps for the first time and get them into the regular phase of the program.
Okay.
And with that, we're going to open it up for you guys. If you have any questions, here's our contact information if you want to reach out to us later on. But we just want to thank you guys for your time. Good morning. My name is Manuel Razo with the Texas.
All righty, everyone. Well, we've gotten to the end of the presentation. Great job to our presenters that presented this morning. We are entering into the live for Q&A questions, and we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the questions that you have posted on the web page itself. Don't forget that you can type in your questions on the bottom right-hand corner, and we'll try to get to your questions. And if we can't, we'll certainly try to answer them at a later date. So the first question we have is, what are the reactions for the communities receiving the more extensive BLE data? At ASFPM, the number one need we hear from communities is more data. Has it been well received?
So to that, I think everybody that's received it so far here in the state has been just, they love it because now they have point and click VFEs for those approximate A zones. I think that's one of the hardest things for floodplain administrators is trying to determine what that BFE is, and not just them, but or if you're the property owner, having to go get an engineer or surveyor to do that, that just adds on to the cost. So I think the ones that we presented it to have loved it, and they're more than willing to use it. And I think one of the things that we've done is we've had a couple of webinars. We were planning on doing some BLE training around the state, but due to the circumstances, we weren't able to do that. So we put together a quick 2-hour webinar on BLE, and we've had, I don't know, maybe 120 people between the two webinars that we hosted. So I think it's been well received statewide so far.
Awesome. Second question, did you move from BLE to detailed study using the same hydrology method, regression, or did it include a detailed rainfall runoff model?
So we actually took the flood protection planning studies and moved those forward into our detailed phase 2 studies. We used the base level engineering as a point of comparison. So we use that really to go back and validate our results. Did they look reasonable? Do our flood plans look reasonable? And so our detailed study actually used a detailed rainfall runoff method where we updated to Atlas 14 rainfall.
Awesome.
But Erica, in the areas where the BLE, I mean, we compared the BLE to the detailed studies, and it was really, really close. I mean, so yes, even though we didn't use it, the results were, I mean, they lined up pretty good.
Yeah, they confirmed in those rural areas that the base level engineering was very good in our rural locations.
Awesome. Another question, how are the BLE results calibrated to gauge data?
Yeah, I'll take that one and just kind of get in a high level. We do a frequency analysis on all the gauges and then compare them to our regional regression and kind of use engineering judgment to see if there's a constant factor that we can apply to our regional regression flows to kind of more align with the gauges. And specifically in Texas, we look at both regional regression equations, and so to see which one better compares to the gauges. There's a little bit of engineering judgment whether that factor is applied just to the main stem or to the tribs, and kind of take it case by case. But overall, we've gotten very, very positive results and good alignment using that process.
Next question, how extensively do you update the models using aerial imagery?
So we use the aerial imagery to validate our topography. So we basically go back and look at our terrain data. If there's something that's changed in the more recent aerials, for example, if there was a structure like a road crossing that's been removed in the recent aerials, we would want to make sure that we adjust our models accordingly. So those are really just used to validate our topography.
Awesome. How are the streams analyzed below dams and reservoirs?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think, again, it's a case-by-case basis. We have such a variety of reservoirs in Texas, and we look at each one, whether it's a flood control, recreational, what kind of storage behind it. But traditionally, that is somewhere where BLE models could be enhanced to really account for that storage. But what we'll do is reduce flows downstream of dams, either to remove the flow upstream or to reduce it to try to account for that impoundment behind it. But again, I mean, we've had a lot of good results, and gauges are certainly helpful, but that's somewhere where somebody could take the next step and enhance that study.
Awesome. Next question, have any communities taken the base level engineering studies and added structures and adopted them in lieu of their existing Zone A's studies?
I don't think we've gotten that far yet. I think it's the BLE is still so new that I don't think we've quite hit that where the communities are doing that. We're looking at how we can make the BLE. I mean, it's already a great product. How we can enhance it, down the road. Our big push right now is just to get the BLE coverage statewide, not just for the floodplain administrators and to use at the local level, but also for our state flood planning process that's underway right now. So that's our focus. We're looking at ways to enhance it, and then looking at also how we want to maintain the data. We don't want it to sit there and get old. So we want to look at ways to identify which watersheds we need to go back and update. And maybe we don't need to do the entire watershed, maybe just a portion of it. And maybe that's where we can go in there and add some structures, add some survey in some way to enhance the data.
Awesome. Got maybe for another couple of questions. Have you experienced any pushback in rural areas where they see more flood risk where it may have been not mapped before? And what was your messages on how it was received?
I don't know if any of you guys watched the presentation that Jackie Hayes did yesterday on BLE. We had, she covered some of that. And one of the things that I've noticed is we had one area down in Guadalupe County where I went and showed them the BLE because the data was out, but they didn't know how to use it. They didn't know what it was. So we went and talked with them, and they went and looked at a specific area and on the firms because they went through MapMod and they really didn't have any updated modeling. The BLE does. And so they were able to see some areas that are on the BLE data shown to be inundated by the 100-year where the firms didn't. So they've really embraced the fact that now they have ways to find these additional areas of risk where they didn't have it before. So I think, like I said, everybody that we've talked to is excited about it. They know that it comes with updated terrain, which is huge for our state at least, because we just didn't have that initially, right? So we really haven't had any pushback yet. I think because it's all new data, they're willing to accept the fact that maybe this is right. And I think additionally, we've had such large flood events in the past 5 years that I think that has really opened up people's eyes to be willing to accept some additional data and seeing that additional flood risk.
Awesome. And we'll go to one more question. Can a property owner use BLE data to support a LOMA, or are they still better off using surveyor information?
No, they can. It just depends on the situation, but the surveyor can go and get the BFE off the BLE viewer our data is hosted on, Region 6 data. They can go and do that to pull that report that comes from the viewer, attach that to their elevation certificate and submit it to FEMA. I'm not going to say that every time they will get a LOMA, but there's the possibility is there, and it can be used to support that process.
Awesome. And Manny, one more question, just for the audience itself. They're asking, is there a schedule or something on the website that they can find where each county will be able to, find the information available for them?
So we are in the process of updating and creating a viewer for the state, so people can go and see kind of where the BLE is in the works. We're looking to develop BLE statewide over the next about 4 years and have complete statewide coverage. We're still kind of working out what the best approach is to get it done. I will say that it will probably be something similar to what's in the flood planning regions that the state has adopted. So we're going to try to fill those in. What that looks like exactly, I don't know, but we're hoping to get some data out there on the Texas Water Development Board website over the next probably three months or so, 3 to 6 months.
Awesome.
But if anybody has any questions about it, feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call, and we can look at where your county is, and we can talk about it.
Sounds good. All righty. Well, we've come to the end of our first presentation. Mr. Young, Mr. Razzo, Ms. Nordstrom, thank you so much for your presentation. And for those that are asking on the chat, the presentations will be available at a later date, available at ASFPM. They will come out with the information on that to let y'all know when that is available. So keep enjoying it, and I appreciate your presentation, folks. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to move on to the next presentation, our second presentation in our concurrent session here. To BLE or not to BLE is a presentation on efficient regional scale flood mapping, indicated fluvial flood map for Ireland. Ms. Emma Brown will be presenting. This presentation describes the recent national indicative fluvial mapping project, which was implemented, and an innovative approach to a national fluvial flood hazard mapping for Ireland. The project aimed to improve on the indicative fluvial mapping produced for the first cycle of the flood directives to improve the previous flood risk assessments. The resulting outputs provided fluvial flood spatial data covering all watercourses in Ireland, with a watershed area of greater than approximately 2 square miles, totaling 17,000 miles of watercourse. This presentation will be an interest to modelers and floodplain managers looking to implement economic large-scale modeling of watersheds. Ms. Emma Brown is a chartered civil engineer for 24 years with international experiences in project management, flood modeling and forecasting, hydrology and climate change impact assessments. Emma is a flood forecaster and software team manager at HR Wallingford within the Flood and Watershed Management Group and has a special interest in the hydrology of the River Nile. Emma has worked extensively overseas. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick off her presentation.
Hello, my name's Emma Brown from HR Wallingford. Today I'll be presenting on behalf of my co-authors at HR Wallingford in the UK and our Texas office, and the Office of Public Works in Ireland, to describe a project recently carried out, the National Indicative Fluvial Flood Mapping Project for Ireland, with the Office of Public Works and University College Dublin.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
As an overview of my presentation, I'll begin with an introduction which will set the scene, describing the responsibility for flood risk management in Ireland, some of the key drivers and earlier studies that provided key foundations for this study. In the overall approach, I'll describe the key features, each of the components of the modelling
some troubles getting in.
Detail,
I haven't been able to see any of the videos, so I don't know what's actually going on at the moment.
And the importance of rigorous QA procedures in a project such as this, which has very large spatial coverage and which has been largely automated.
Yeah, I haven't got it, but I've clicked on the link and I'm not getting any video at all. I can see the session, I can see my session, and I'm logged in as me, but there's no video.
Some suggestions for wider application of the approach.
Anyway.
So the responsibility for flood risk management in Ireland lies with the Office of Public Works. They have responsibility for building and maintaining flood
presentation is live now, is it?
They have a rolling programme of schemes under development at any time. Since 1945, the OPW has maintained the arterially drained channels which were built to relieve flooding in rural areas. More recently, the OPW has led a proactive
I just have 5 minutes, do I? Because I can see that there's a stream of questions to the right
flood risk management plans
on the website
that set out the measures to address flood risk. On the right of this slide, you can see an image from the OPW's Flood Info website, which is their national flood information portal, which provides location-specific access to flood risk and flood management information to the public.
Okay.
Just thinking about some of the key drivers for this project. Overall, the European
does the session
Union
moderator
Directive of 2007
ask them to me, or do I have to read them on the screen to see which ones to
map
answer?
Flood risk in order to support adequate and coordinated measures to reduce that risk. It requires the member states to assess if all watercourses and coastlines are at risk from flooding, to map the flood extent and assets and humans at risk in these areas, and then to take adequate and coordinated measures to reduce this flood risk. The approach is cyclical, recognising that the climate, the watersheds and receptors change over time, such that a review is carried out every 6 years as necessary and any revision is carried out. It also reinforces the rights of the public to assess this information and to have a say in the planning process. Some key flood studies related to ours. In the past, the OPW completed the Catchment Flood Risk Assessment and Management Programme, commonly known as CFRAM, which was the largest flood risk study that had ever been carried out in Ireland. In the map on the right of this slide, you can see the key river basin districts, which are the main watersheds in Ireland for which the CFRAM programme was implemented. Within this CFRAM programme, a first cycle National Preliminary Flood Risk Assessment, PFRA for short, for the Republic of Ireland was completed in 2012 and identified areas at significant flood risk and included the production of national indicative fluvial flood maps. So the PFRA acted as a screening exercise to identify those areas where the risk of flooding was significant. As a result, 300 areas for further assessment, as they became known, were identified nationwide. And in the map on the right, you can see highlighted in orange the extent of the detailed studies that were carried out for those 300 areas and related watercourses. And subsequent to that, detailed flood risk assessments and flood risk management plans were implemented. In parallel with this wide-ranging programme of flood risk assessment and management, a review and update of the hydrological approaches used in Ireland was underway, also led by the Office of Public Works. The Flood Studies report had provided tools and techniques for hydrological assessment across the United Kingdom and Ireland since its inception in 1970. In recognition of large amounts of extra available data since then, and new techniques and methods, the OPW led the Flood Studies Update, FSU, programme from 2005 to provide improved methods of extreme rainfall and flood estimation at gauged and ungauged locations across Ireland. So, some of the key features of the approach, the overall aim for which was to produce second-generation indicative fluvial flood maps that were of a higher quality and accuracy to those produced for the first cycle PFRA. The update to the PFRA has recently been carried out, covering 19,000 miles of river reaches, separated into 37 watersheds, consisting of 509 sub-watersheds, with areas of greater than about 2 square miles. The approach has been designed to use rapid model build and simulation techniques, with the majority of tasks being automated. We've run 9 sets of simulations for the whole country. It builds upon the knowledge, tools and techniques developed under the CFRAM programme and the FSU, and has been designed to take the latest data into account with a pilot study to test and refine the method. And in the map on the right, you can see the 2 watersheds, the River Blackwater here in dark blue and the Upper Shannon River here in light blue, which were used to test and refine the method before it was rolled out. So there are 37 major drainage areas, known as units of management, for which the rollout had to be carried out. So for the overall approach, there are 5 major steps that I'd like to describe to you. And it's worth pointing out that the large majority of the steps were automated. The overall project took around 1 year, and around half of that for the piloting and the second half for the rollout. I'll give you a detailed description of each of the 5 steps in the subsequent slides. So the first step, of course, was to gather and analyse the data, because the availability, quality and resolution of the data would be key to what we could achieve under this project. And there are a wide range of scalar and spatial data. So watercourses were derived from a GIS spatial layer, mapping all the subject watercourses across the country. Hydrological data were taken from the Flood Studies Update node data, for which there are 20 catchment descriptors at each node. We also used gauged data from annual maxima series and water level time series. We had access to previous detailed hydraulic models from the CFRAM studies, for instance, and their results. We used a digital terrain model, which was IPSAR data with a spatial resolution of 5 meters. We had access to arterial drainage data, which were the manually enhanced channels for draining rural areas, road and rail crossings, land cover, observed flood extents for validation of the method, and coastal water levels. And all of these data were assessed and summarised at the start of the project. So the first pilot watershed was the River Blackwater near Cork in the south of Ireland. You can see the location in this locator map to the bottom right. On this map, you can see light blue outlines of the whole subject watercourse layer. And in fact, the light blue bits that you can see were those bits that were clipped out because their catchment watershed areas were less than our 2 square mile threshold. In green, you can see the flood studies update nodes, which are spaced at 550 yards along all the major rivers. They're so close together that they merge into what looks like a green line on here. So there are 134,000 of those nodes at 550 yard intervals, and each one has around 20 watershed descriptors. So the first task in terms of modelling was to start with the hydrology. We needed to derive 9 different sets of inflows to the hydraulic models, beginning with calculation of the index flood at each FSU node from the watershed descriptors. So that began with calculation of the median annual flood, or QMED. This was used in the flood studies update and could be calculated in this project from the 7-parameter equation derived under the flood studies update methods. So the QMED adjustment factor could then be calculated based upon our derived QMED value, which we derived from the catchment descriptors, comparing those with annual maxima derived QMED values that we calculated. And these were applied using a pivotal site approach, fundamentally the nearest downstream gauge on any stretch of river. So you can see the calculated adjustment factors in the map on the right. The bluer colours indicate a reduction in the derived value, and the reds indicate an increase. So the method derived using the flood studies update equation gives you a rural factor, and then an urban adjustment factor had to be applied based on the urban fraction of the watershed at that location. The next step was to express design flows for other return periods as a ratio over QMED using growth curves. Now, growth curves in Ireland tend to be relatively mild. You can see in the map on the right, which came from the Flood Studies report of 1970, a range of regional growth curves for the UK, and that for Irish catchments, watersheds at the bottom here. The mildness of the growth curves in Ireland tends to be due to the attenuation in lakes and on the floodplains, and the proportion of in-channel flow is relatively high. So it was important to reflect recent gauge data in the growth curves. We were able to use information from growth curves derived in earlier detailed studies, such as the CFRAM project, but we needed to update these to more recent data, to use more recent data. So we calculated adjustment factors by watershed, and there's a map on the right to show these. A reduction in the growth curve factors is shown in blue, and you see that gradually increases towards a bigger and bigger increase in the northwest of the country. So at this stage, we had the peak floods for a range of return periods and climate scenarios, and we needed to fit the full hydrograph for the whole event to be simulated. So again, the flood studies update methods had derived tools and techniques for doing this, and the derivation of the design flood hydrograph was based again upon the watershed descriptors at each node. So for each 550 yard spaced node, we had derived 9 sets of hydrographs for different combinations of return period or annual exceedance probability and climate scenario. So in addition to the current climate, we were looking at the mid-range future scenario, which assesses climate and watershed changes over the next 100 years, assuming a medium emission prediction from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But we were also looking at a high-end future scenario, which is similar but a high emission prediction for the coming 100 years. So at the core of the system is two-dimensional hydraulic modelling carried out in InfoWorks ICM. And these are the key steps in producing those models, beginning with defining the model extents. And here for this, we use the digital terrain model to track along the rivers and examine the floodplain levels. So this is we found this to be best on complex watersheds. We could then construct a 2D grid. Full 2D modelling tends to be better than 1D, 2D, which can suffer from instabilities due to coupling. And here the DTM resolution was crucial to the accuracy of our modelling. We were able to use irregular meshing to capture topographic changes, and the areas of those meshes range from 25 square metres to 400 square metres. We could estimate Manning's roughness, and we did this based upon the Corrine land cover data set. And then we set the downstream boundaries, either through coastal information, where there were downstream boundaries at the CFRAM models, we could use those, or where they were not available, we used the downstream reach water level. So estimating channel characteristics was one of the main challenges in this project. The capacity of the channel started with the assumption that bankful flow is QMed, our index flood, but I'll provide more details on this in the coming slides. So some of the key aspects of the hydraulic modelling, as I mentioned, all the models are built in 2 dimensions with a 2-dimensional mesh as shown. The region shown here in the figure is at Mallow on the River Blackwater, which was one of our pilot watersheds. And in the figure, it can be seen that the elements take advantage of many of the benefits of irregular mesh model grids, and these include that mesh elements are aligned to features of interest in the floodplain. The channel can be clearly identified with lower ground levels and smooth sides. And elements are also aligned with significant topographic features. Finer mesh elements can clearly be seen in the mesh in the location of the bridge here and the weir, as well as areas with steep slopes, commonly alongside the river channel. Another key aspect was looking at the channel, estimating the channel capacity and adjusting our index flood, QMed, for different types of channel. The channel would be inserted into the 2D mesh based on our estimated capacity. So we needed to check our capacity calculation in different locations, and you can see some of the photographs of gauging station locations that we examined. It's worth noting that these sites may contain a bias towards higher than expected channel capacity because they would be expected to contain flows of above average recurrence interval. So in terms of refining our estimates of channel capacity, we looked at a range of different types of watercourse, and the figure on the left shows the example of the relationship between bankful flow and QMed for a range of urban watercourses across Ireland. And you can see here that even for this subset of sites, there's quite a large variation in that ratio. In fact, most of these urban watercourses lay in the CFRAM areas which were outside of our modelling remit. But for the actual adjustments for rivers with shallow slopes, moderate slopes, steep slopes and arterially drained areas, we calculated some guidance percentages of QMed for channel capacity in those locations. In addition to that, we noticed that the digital terrain model actually captured some of the channel already, so we needed to adjust the amount of additional channel capacity which would be burnt into the 2D mesh. And this was dependent upon channel width. So for narrower channels, less than 10 meters wide, there was no channel tended to be shown in the DTM, but as the channel widths increased, 15 meters, about 30% of the channel was reported in the DTM, 20 to 40 meters wide, around 50% of the channel, and greater than 40 meters wide, an even larger proportion. So simulations were run on GPU machines here at Wallingford. Key outputs were created for a range of spatial data sets, clipped to the boundaries of the CFRAM models so that they could be plugged back in to provide a complete data set for Ireland. And here are some examples of spatial outputs for the Blackwater watershed that we looked at earlier, which was our pilot, one of our pilots. Here we're looking at mapped water level. Here for the same area, this is water depth. And finally, velocity, which is a key output for calculating flood risk. At each of those FSU nodes, 550 yard spacing, water level and flow was calculated. And here on the map, you can see the 1% annual exceedance probability shown as one of the outputs. The last step was to classify the reaches according to flood duration, shown here, and for the onset of flooding. And here in the example of reach classification for flood duration for the 1% annual exceedance probability. So overall, this was a pragmatic approach to national scale flood mapping. It was designed to combine intelligent automation of the repetitive processes, such as hydrological calculations and so on, with experienced hydraulic modelling and critical quality assurance techniques. So within and between tasks, there were quality assurance checks that were designed to complement the automated processes. And here's an example of a workflow that was generally developed for each of those processes. It shows input and output data sets, automated and manual processes, and here in blue, automated and manual QA activities. It also shows a feedback loop that may be required where a QA check had flagged some data that failed, and it may have been necessary for an experienced modeler to manually clean or correct the data before rerunning all or part of the workflow process. So in terms of the outputs, the results were calibrated against the detailed CFRAM models in the pilot study areas, and the observed data were validated, used to validate the method. Our results were cross-checked against those earlier preliminary flood risk assessment 1 outputs, and it was found that there was an overall increase in the accuracy of the results, and in addition, more realistic flood outlines, as you can see in our results on the right. And the realism is good for end users such as the public who will be accessing the maps. Some further outputs on the left, you can see some sample results, flood extent spatial data. This map shows 5%, 1% and 0.1% annual exceedance probability for the current climate scenario. And on the right, some sample results for flood depth, flood level and flood speed data at the same location. So in summary, it's been a national method applied to 17,000 miles of river with a high level of automation and relatively fast speed of delivery. So the overall method implementation took about a year in total, with around half of that for the pilot study. And the method is suitable for future updating, so it's been designed to be replicable in the next cycle of the flood risk assessment. In terms of potential enhancements and applications, as newer, higher resolution digital terrain models become available, it can be updated. It can be updated with more local data, so this was very much a national level study. It could be adapted for any flood return period of interest, and additional receptor data can be added to take this to flood risk assessment level. Thank you.
All right, well, great job, Ms. Brown. Great presentation. We loved to hear all that information. We now move into the area where we're doing a Q&A here. So we'll go ahead and move into a couple of questions here, Ms. Brown. So the first question is the mesh generation largely automated, or is there a significant effort required to identify hydraulically significant topographical features?
Okay, that's a very good question. On a national scale project such as this, we couldn't afford to have something that would be too time consuming and require too much effort. So the tool that we were using allows us to automatically generate terrain sensitive meshing. So it interrogates the digital terrain model, looks at the gradients in a specific area, and allocates the resolution accordingly. In addition, you're able to identify mesh zones. So you can say, in this zone here, I want the meshing to be of a specific resolution where I want to pick up specific features. And where we need less detail, we have a lower spatial resolution. So it's largely automated.
Good. Our next question is, flood growth curves are not typically used in mapping studies in the US. Would you mind describing the concept?
Okay, sure. So the whole approach to the inflow hydrology is based upon calculation of the index flood QMed, which is that which has a return period of 2 years. And given that basic index flood, by applying certain factors, growth factors, you're able to convert that through a conversion factor to floods of a different return period. And so if you have a range of different return periods, each with a different factor, then you can plot those growth factors to generate your growth curve for a specific type of catchment. And that was the graph that I showed on one of the slides, where I showed that Irish catchments tend to have much flatter growth curves because a lot of the water tends to be kept in channel, and the catchments are generally very flat. So you don't get much increase in flow for the higher return periods.
Awesome. The other question was, what 2D program was used for the modeling?
All of the modeling was done in InfoX ICM. 2D modeling has become feasible just in the past handful of years for something on this scale. But yeah, InfoX ICM, and that's with a GPU machine running the simulation, so a fast simulation computer.
Awesome. And one more question, Ms. Brown. Does Ireland use this data for some level of management or regulation, or is it just knowledge and awareness?
These national level studies are used generally for informing the public. They're used by the client, the Office of Public Works, for identifying areas where flood mitigation works are needed or where more detailed studies are needed. So they're used both by the client for flood management and by the general public for a general understanding of the flood risk in those areas.
Awesome. And the return periods, are they based on the 30 years of data?
There's variable lengths of data across Ireland, quite long data sets. So we've looked at the one in 100-year return period flood is normally the flood of interest for flood planning in Ireland. So that's our main return period. But we also looked at 5% and 0.1.
Awesome. Well, Ms. Brown, that's pretty much the questions that we have so far. So if anyone about you have any further questions, don't don't hesitate to put them in the chat. We'll try to get those answered, somewhere throughout the conference itself here. And we'll try to get Ms. Brown to go ahead and do so. Ms. Brown, thank you so much for participating today, and great presentation, and thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Awesome. So the next presentation is our third presentation in our concurrent session, and it is a presentation on building community capability with the base level engineering desk reference. This presentation will be FEMA Region 6 has worked closely with its state, regional, and local partners to identify areas where flood risk is limited or dated. Their base level engineering effort, initiated in late 2014, has resulted in the preparation and release of 200,000 plus miles of base level engineering for the use at the local level in Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Texas and Arkansas. The data is also available to the public through the estimated base flood elevation web viewer. This session will overview the document shared tools, templates, and materials made available through the base level engineering desk reference. The session will discuss how the document is being distributed and provide some future state visioning for the documents and future updates. Our presenter will be Ms. Elizabeth Savage. Ms. Elizabeth Savage is a professional engineer, is a regional program management lead supporting FEMA Region 6. She is a chief architect and strategist for the base level engineering approach, leading a multifunctional, multi-partner team to prepare and provide actionable flood hazard information for the use of local, state, and federal entities. Ms. Savage has 20 years of supporting FEMA, has offered her variety of engagement opportunities with homeowners, business owners, disaster survivors, and a range of FEMA programs that have informed and shaped the best base level engineering tactics, strategies, and tools. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick our presentation. Ms. Savage, you can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. This is Diane Howe, and I have with me today Elizabeth Savage, and we're going to be presenting on base level engineering, the desk reference, building community capacity. So given the virtual world that we find ourselves in, we ask you to close your eyes and think about why you're here. Think about the vision you have for the community you live in, the communities you work for, and the communities you promote with your work each and every day.
Thank you.
Elizabeth and I have been working together for over a decade in the FEMA Region 6 office in Denton, Texas. We take the time with each task to identify the outcome we're trying to drive. In other words, what are we looking to promote and propagate? Every day we have an opportunity to help communities and individuals. And our vision is one of smart growth and disaster resilient communities that are aware of and preparing for the natural hazards that surround them. We want to help people soar. We work with lots of teams and partners within and outside of FEMA to get an effort like base level engineering off the ground. And we work very hard to verify we have a plan. We plan the work and we work the plan. This slide overviews steps you can employ when you're looking to engage others in your activities. At the heart of our work, we do best when we engage the change required, the behaviors, actions, and interactions to build success. Studies have shown that people trust an idea that requires change when they hear the same information from various sources. The change we're looking for is minimal. The efforts we're undertaking are more foundational.
I can't see the arrows on the right.
First, we need to define what we're looking to do. Base level engineering and other flood hazard not shown on firms is just data. It's important to not get too tied up in the name. At the heart of it, just remember that base level engineering is data. How we deliver it to benefit our communities, the tools we build for them to use it, and the products we provide to educate and support community understanding at the use of this data is key for us. Elizabeth is going to share more on the plan, our strategy, and launched to implement these tools.
Thanks, Diane. Real quick, base level engineering is information, as Diane said, and it's solving some of the historic hurdles that communities have faced with the flood insurance rate maps. Base level engineering creates a broad and wide set of flood hazard information. It creates and makes this data available for free. It's funny that we have to mention that. Remember to start at the beginning when talking about a new concept and set of information. It's hard for people to gauge the differences if you don't let them know that they have access to this information and it's readily available for their use. This minimizes local costs and allows developers and others defining and redefining flood hazards throughout a community additional information to work from. And it's free. So that gets to the point of what are we looking to communicate. As Diane mentioned, base level engineering is just data, and this data does complement the effective firm. It doesn't replace it. The uses for this information are boundless. The modeling is available, and the data and results are also available for download and utilization for a variety of local efforts. This data intends to strengthen local floodplain management efforts, and the best available information rules that are available to communities are ones that we're going to focus on in all of our data tool building. How do we get this done? This is a huge undertaking. The change management that Diane mentioned at the beginning of the presentation is one that requires a lot of reinforcement. We've been working since December of 2014 with state NFIP coordinators, active cooperating technical partners, state hazard mitigation officers, and a variety of federal and other state partners through emergency management and opportunities that exist throughout our region to interact with them. Engaging these key influencers are key to our success. Understanding how data will be utilized, the questions that people will have that are not connected to the generation of this effort is important for us to keep in mind. We get a lot of questions about the concept, about the data, and about the uses. And our intention is to assure that we provide information and utilization tools that help people enforce those uses. Getting the word out is key. We can build it, but if they don't come, then we'll have a website looking for people's input and engagement. We leverage a number of existing events like floodplain management associations. In the early days, for the first sort of 18 months of this effort, we utilized those to query the users, the floodplain administrators, the local community officials to understand what questions they would have when this data become available. Understanding that is key to creating the tools in the right sort of succession, answering and having people utilize the information to trust and engage with it is key. We've worked hard to engage with large recovery efforts, billion-dollar efforts in the states of Louisiana and Texas, assuring that this information that we've created is available for use and reuse and refinement. That starter data is super important to assisting these large recovery and mitigation planning efforts. And state and partner implementation plans have also been developed with some of our cooperating technical partners in order to engage and inform the effort. These state and partner-specific BLE action plans are just one-page items in our strategy that sort of overview the objectives of that partner, sort of from their perspective. How can base level engineering be utilized? Where are they in the implementation of this effort? Who sort of does what in the prioritization, analysis, and the delivery of the data? Sort of who's on first. What we do is we also define the information that's been done to date so we know what we have to build upon, and then identify the upcoming efforts and the things that we're trying to motivate and innovate around. We work closely with our state teams all across a number of different disciplines in order to engage and utilize this information. Then comes sort of the final three. In order to launch this effort, we spent a lot of time and work with the United States Geological Survey in order to make the data available, interactive, and accessible. A lot of GIS data has been delivered to communities, and some of them don't have the tools to engage with it. A CD collecting dust on the shelf is not as useful as an interactive site that's available, free of use, and 24/7. This website was also built to engage and allow people to download the data with a point and click. Those implementation plans we went over quickly also support this launch. And we have a couple of other ideas like quick state guide pages that we'll show you in a moment, and a BLE ambassador set of folks that are available at the local level. In the state of Oklahoma, we work with the mentors for the Floodplain Management Association in order to leverage the 9 folks that work with communities across the state. Engaging those 9 folks allows us to get to many more communities. Supporting the utilization of this effort is what the desk reference is all about. Creating modules, how-to guides, tools, flashcards, and fact sheets. Allow people to interact with the estimated BFE reports that are available through the site and support people downloading and getting to the data that they need. Success in our eyes is a broad understanding of this information, people using, leveraging, and interacting with the information, communities adopting and leveraging base level engineering data in their floodplain management efforts, and consistency across the broad swath of ambassadors we have supporting and engaging in this implementation. So we'll get to the tools now. State quick guide pages are something that was an easy win for us, really. Each one of our 5 state floodplain management associations has a quick guide. It's basically a set of flip cards, flashcards, and quick high-level information to assist floodplain managers and floodplain administrators across our regions and our states. These 4 pages they can be inserted quickly into the state quick guides when they're updated. The 4 pages overview the concept, the data available. They introduce our website. They provide a list of different data uses for people to contemplate, and it identifies and overviews the information available on our estimated BFE report guides. At the bottom, you'll see the name of the tool, and all of these data sets are available on the website shown below. There are multiple ways to engage with our data. We wanted to make sure that we had this information accessible. For people without GIS tools and support, access to the internet is all that's needed to interact with the estimated BFE viewer. This BFE viewer provides reports, allows downloads, and allows people to pan and scan throughout the information. We also have the data available in a REST service. This allows communities to ingest the information and automatically receive updates as the viewer's data sets are expanded or modified. Third, they can download and use the information locally on their computers. This allows them to provide the information to developers within their area and provide information and utilize it in community efforts. The viewer is located on a USGS platform. The ESTBFE is how we communicate and talk about it. There's 3 possible interactions with the data sets available on the base level engineering viewer. Those include viewing, panning, and scanning throughout the data. You can download data sets with 1 click, or you can look up the base flood elevation at any property address or latitude, longitude point provided. These site-specific base flood elevation reports are available in both high risk and low to moderate risk flood areas. That's the 100 and the 500-year areas. You'll see on the bottom of the 2 reports shown on this computer that on the left, there's a red home. That's showing that the structure reviewed is inside the estimated base floodplain for the 1% annual chance. On the right, it's yellow, and that means that it's in the 500-year. The first question that we get when data becomes available is this data usable now? It's important to note that FEMA's model ordinance language allows communities to obtain, review, and reasonably utilize any information related to flood hazard information and risk being shown. These maps may be referenced, reviewed, utilized, and adopted at the local level. There are some additional screenshots here of some of the slides that we utilize in our training about where best available information rules come from and how flood insurance rate maps and base level engineering may be used together. On the concept of best available information, we've created a module in order to overview the need for this best available information, the utilization of it, and some overview of the policies related to it, some tools that assist communities in defining when BLE may be used as best available data. At the bottom, you'll see the name of the module, and again, it's available on our FEMA.gov BLE resource site. A complementary tool to the best available information module is the use matrix. This use matrix has informational data to assist communities in looking at both their effective firm, the results from the estimated BFE viewer, and identify how base level engineering may be utilized at the local level to support floodplain management efforts. The tool's name is at the bottom, and again, it's available. It's important to note that this tool was first generated by the Arkansas Natural Resource Division, one of our CTPs, and it's been adapted by FEMA for broader use. LOMAS is another quick utilization of how base level engineering information can support community development. We've created two sets of fact sheets, one on the concept of a letter of map amendment, when they're utilized and the data that's needed. The other identifies the outage shown. Basically, if BFEs are shown on a firm or a floodplain is shown on a firm, yet there's additional information showing that you're physically outside of, the structure is physically outside of that floodplain, there is a manner in which a LOMA can be submitted without an elevation certificate, and this is overviewed within the LOMA outage shown document. Both of these documents are available on our BLE resources page. Don't forget letters of map revision. We've created materials to outline how this data set may be used. The models and the spatial information could be used for both letters of map revision and conditional letters of map revision. Again, quick facts and the process is provided, utilization of BLE data, and a touch back to the best available information is all covered in this module. It's really important for us to provide an overview of real-world situations. What you see here is an orange polygon, basically defining the area of a proposed subdivision. We make sure to reinforce the utilization of flood insurance rate maps ahead of any BLE data use. First, we point people to the National Flood Hazard Layer in order to look up the area in question. Then we also ask them to look at the BFE viewer to see if there's additional information. In this case, the firms and the BLE viewer show that these areas are Zone A, and there are not models available through the Map Service Center. However, the information created in the BLE assessment may be utilized. We have a module looking at informed land development. This defines development, identifies how firms should be utilized, identifies the use of the additional coverage provided by BLE, provides overview of how models may be scaled, both one-dimensional and two-dimensional models may be available through our site. And so we touch on refinements that should be looked at by developers when looking at building a subdivision. We provide an overview on page 4, which you see right in the middle of the screen with the blue box on the left, that defines how the different data sets can be utilized at the local level to look at the effects of a development on an area. And then finally, the last page overviews additional information that and ways that the base level engineering may be utilized for planning, for prioritization, for evacuation plans, for hazard mitigation plans, for open space planning, for grants, and for a range of other activities. In order to assure that we keep it simple, we also have some quick how-tos on how to find the right HEC-RAS model. When you're going through the viewer, you will point and click one zip file that includes all models for the entire watershed. So this how-to document provides you a couple of quick pointers in order to find the model you're looking for, finding the stream center line and the name with the viewer, and then performing a quick access to that model through a keystroke search. We provide email and letter templates. Basically, communities can utilize this language in order to inform developers that data is available in their area. We also overview all of the data that's available in the spatial files. There are 5 different downloads, and so we want to make sure to provide some information on what is included in each of those downloads so that people receive and download the information that they are most interested in. One of the final concepts we're going to go over today is an advanced floodplain concept, and base level engineering provides us an opportunity to really engage with local community officials and provide them the information, even outside of floodplains, that have been developed. In location A, you'll see a structure. With the viewer, you can point and click on this house location and easily retrieve a base flood elevation. But in location B, since it's outside of the floodplain, this is basically a null data area, meaning it's not been defined as a high or a low to moderate floodplain area. Since there's no data there, the report will not be available. However, downloading the information makes it easy with a couple of quick steps to find the base flood elevation just outside the floodplain. We've developed a how-to with step-by-step instructions of how to locate the cross-section and centerline files, to load them to either free viewers or to your GIS software available. It identifies the location that we're trying to locate and a series of steps to define a new cross-section and measure down to the location of interest. This tool connects up with one of our most exciting available tools that can be utilized not just with BLE data, but also with firms and profiles. Utilizing the steps, users will define 5 different data elements. They will find the stream station of the upstream cross-section and the downstream cross-section. They will determine and query the water surface elevations of both the up and downstream cross-section, and they will do a short distance measurement. Providing these 5 data elements in the grayed out boxes then allows people to develop a base flood elevation for the location of interest. The tool itself also includes these step-by-step instructions. In case you're wondering, we want to make sure that everything is centrally located and easy to use. As we've spoken about, the BLE desk reference is actually something that we've done in a modular fashion. This allows us to add, refresh, and engage new concepts quickly without having to update an entire volume of information. Our base level engineering tools and resources are available on one FEMA.gov website. They are all 508 compliant and available to you. These include the modules, fact sheets, how-to documents, not just the ones that we've shown today, but also others related to social media use, and some fact sheets about the products, the grids, and the tools that are available. We're looking and planning an interactive choose your adventure story map and a series of community best practices in a crowdsourcing site. So keep your eyes open. We're hoping to be back in a couple of years with success stories around the use and utilization of our information. With that modular design, we can continue to build and add on to it. Some of the additional items that we're looking at building revolve around these concepts here: community and vision planning, recovery, emergency management, risk assessments that can be performed, insurance rating, and developing permitting reviews. There's tons and tons of additional ideas, and we would love for your input on other ways that this data can be utilized or other tools that you may find of assistance. Thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, we'll leave it open for questions. Okay.
All right, well, great presentation. We are now moving into the question and answer portion of the presentation here. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and get started here. So let's see here. I think I just lost my connection here. Yeah, just I lost my questions here, so yes. Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, so all right, so let me get to it real quick here, Sarah. Let's see. So first question is, what are the statistics of the BFE viewer usage?
I'll take that one. I'm glad you asked. We launched the viewer in April of 2017, and since that time, we've had about 60,000 page views. That breaks down to about 25,000 unique users. And in the last 2 months, we've actually seen an increase, gaining additional 3,300 folks joining and interacting with our site. And of those 3,300 users, 1,000 plus BFE reports have been utilized and generated through the viewer.
Awesome. Where's the REST service?
So we do have a REST service. We actually have 2 REST services available, one that shows the floodplains and another that shows the grids. And I can put those URLs into the chat box window so that people can easily leverage and utilize them. I'll put it in a reply to that question.
Awesome. Next question is, have you ever received feedback from the community officials on how they are using BLE within their community?
Diane, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd say, sure. I'd say we received quite a few responses from community officials saying it matches very closely. Where there are a lot of zone A areas, they're able to enhance what they're doing much more quickly as far as locating properties for permitting and providing that BFE. And we've heard a lot of instances where they've said they've been able to assist in other ways. So we're trying to put together some best practices for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, to add on to that just real quickly, what we're finding is a lot of the areas that we're producing information, since they are rural in nature, they actually have some very resourceful people. Some of our community officials are actually using soil maps and wetted soil sort of areas to have done their job previously, and just having, you know, this data available is definitely a step forward. We've seen an increase in the willingness for communities to participate that haven't historically, because now they have a map to sort of react to.
Awesome. And kind of following into that same question, the next question is, did you engage in community and state officials or other potential users directly in the development of the estimated BFE viewer and or interpolation tool, for example, testing it, you know, for its usability and things of that nature?
So we have, we generated the concepts in 2015. We actually talked directly to the NFIP communities in our area, as well as to the state coordinators. We touched base with the SHMOs basically to figure out if we were to go down this path, is it information that they would utilize? We got sort of a resounding yes, and we went from there. This viewer that is live and available is actually a beta viewer. We had a previous model that we had generated on the FEMO Geo platform, And the 2 years while we were generating information, that first set of data that we took out, we actually took it out to our different floodplain management associations. That floodplain management associations in our states have been very gracious in providing us some free booth space. We basically set up and we live there the entire conference long, interact with people, sort of get and gauge questions and infer from that. And those interactions, sort of the information that's needed by our community officials to utilize this.
Awesome. And looking at some of the questions that there are, it seems to be that we're getting a few questions here. It appears that the website only serves 5 states right now. So a lot of the questions are, is this available in other different regions, other states? And if not, is there any anticipation that may change in the coming future?
So we were one of 2 regions to pilot the idea and sort of build out the base level engineering effort. Region 6 took the lead on sort of a 1D analysis. Region 8 took the lead on a 2D analysis. In Region 8, a few of the states are actually hosting the information. Region 7 has a lot of spatial information available through their different partners. In some of the eastern regions, regions 2 and 5, there may not be a broad base level engineering sort of, terminology use, but there are very similar tools and concepts available. The state of Indiana has a great website where they actually have floodways for all of the floodplains that they've done. The state of New York and region 2 are setting up a viewer as well. Out in the West, region 9 and 10 have made investments in base level engineering. And the site that we utilized was actually developed to be able to include everyone within it. And that's sort of an ongoing conversation within FEMA across the regions and with headquarters.
One other question is, who's funding the base level database itself? Is it a collaboration of groups? Is it just one source? Or can it be multiple sources?
So we've been very lucky. When we first kicked off this effort, it was nearly 100% federally funded. Since that initiation, we've had states as well as recovery sort of efforts engage and leverage available monies to do it. Recently, the state of Texas put $1.7 million of their own money into generating BLE. And if you heard in the plenary session, it is their intent to highly fund the remaining portions of the state of Texas, and we're there to support them sort of any way possible.
Awesome. So I know that in the chat box, there's been some entries in there for more references, more information that you can get off of the FEMA Region 6 website. So please check that and look at that information. If there are any other questions, I'm sure there will be contact information given so that you can get in touch with either Diane or Elizabeth here for further questions on that. But ladies, thank you so much for your presentation. Great presentation. As always, we appreciate everything that y'all do for FEMA Region 6, and hopefully we can see this spread out even further out to the rest of the region. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Well, we would be not as far as we are if it wasn't for all of our partners.
Awesome.
So thank you guys too.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the concurrent session for this morning. Don't forget that there is a regional break right now. So visit the virtual conference area. And then the next start would be our plenary session at 11 o'clock. So please attend. So we were informed that this video presentations will be available next week, possibly Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. So, and then I'm sure that they'll start working on possibly providing maybe a PDF version of the presentation if you want to have a copy of that. So please just get in touch with ASFPM. They'll send information out for you. So with that, I appreciate your time this morning. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.